Dive into the dynamic world of high school sports. Whether you're a seasoned athletic director, a newcomer to the field, or simply curious to learn more about this exciting profession, this podcast is your go-to resource for inspiration, education, and a deeper understanding of the game-changing decisions that shape the world of high school athletics. Welcome back to AD 360. I'm Greg Vandermade. We're very excited to bring you this episode. Braves fans and those that live in the Atlanta area will most likely know this name. We're joined today by a special guest, Wiley Ballard of Bally Sports and Braves Radio Network. Wiley, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Greg. I'm thrilled I got a chance to be on and catch up with you guys.
We're super excited to have you because today we're going to be talking an episode all about streaming and how it can help increase fan engagement. Both Scott and I know a lot of ADs are always trying to find the best ways to really engage their campus communities. And I'm sure you're going to be able to shed a ton of expert information on this topic. So we're really excited to get underway. But before I get started, I definitely would be remiss if I didn't introduce my co-host, Scott Rosenberg. Scott, how are we today?
Great. Never better. It's a beautiful Friday here in New Jersey. The weather's awesome. School's starting, plenty of football on the docket tonight. So we're in a good place, man. Wiley, thanks for joining us. I got to go off script from the first question here. I was watching like your sizzle reel, trying to do a little research, and I want to understand eating grasshoppers. Not only eating a grasshopper, but like chugging a bowl of grasshoppers. Can you explain that to me at all?
So when you go to T-Mobile Park in Seattle, they've got a delicacy up there. They have the fried grasshoppers, little lime flavor in there. Not enough lime flavor, if you ask me. But no, opportunity to do something different. And I think we wanted to kind of do a local cuisine taste, if you will. We were up in Seattle. Braves don't go up there too often. And so we each got, both me and then our play-by-play broadcaster Brandon Gaudin and then CJ Nikowski, our analyst, we each got some grasshoppers. They each picked one little grasshopper out of their bowl, and I said, when in Rome, I'm just going to chug this whole little bucket here. So not sure I'd do it again, but I'm glad I did it once. So it was a fun time though. So
Nice.
yeah, I don't know if I'd recommend it, but it was.
I feel like I would have gone for the sushi, like just starting out by that. They must have some of that there. But I'm sure you're going to get some hits. We'll have some people Google you eating grasshoppers. It was amazing.
Yeah. So it's safe to say it's a little bit of an acquired taste then, right?
If there are people who've acquired it, I've yet to meet them. I'll put it that way.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, we're really excited to get underway. So as we start this conversation, I guess before we dive in, Wiley, maybe for our ADs that are tuning in and those listening that maybe not be familiar with your background, would you tell them a little bit about yourself, just kind of your career path and your journey?
Yeah, so I graduated high school in 2012, and I throw the year out there just from a streaming perspective, it was still fairly new. It wasn't brand new, but certainly at the high school level, it was still sort of coming around. The company Play On Sports was heavily involved when I was in school. And so I remember my junior year, this had been in the fall of 2010, or that summer really, I had a conversation with a faculty member that I was close with, Daniel Searle. And he basically told me, hey, we're going to be streaming video for our football games. And I was always a huge sports fan. I had an interest in getting into broadcasting, but I kind of figured that'd be something I would start, when I got to college or maybe even late in college when I'd have that opportunity. And all of a sudden it felt like, opportunity had knocked when I was, 15 years old and had just this spectacular opportunity to just do a lot of creative things, kind of start something new, almost like a new club. And I tell Dan all the time, I've had a lot of fun over my career, a lot of experience I've enjoyed, but none have been more rich or richer than what I did in high school those couple of years. Because I tell people all the time, like, when you're doing high school sports, that's the chance you have to cover your buddies. I mean, I got my best friends are playing basketball or football, and that's pretty special. So I got started in high school with that for a couple of years. I went to Georgia Tech. They did not have a journalism degree whatsoever. But I knew they needed a baseball announcer on radio. And so I said, I'll do that and figure out what I'm going to major in later. And by the time, I was wrapping up my time at Georgia Tech, ACC Network Extra, or on the SEC side, SEC Network Plus or ESPN Plus, they were really starting to gain momentum. And mainly there were just resources being invested by the schools wanting to make those productions look as, professional as possible. So it almost feels like, my career kind of paralleled along with the rise of streaming, not just at the high school level, obviously, but the college level, really. And those have been the opportunities that have been most valuable to me, since, I'm 30 years old now. So since I've graduated, I tell people, the majority of the work I've done thus far has really been streaming. The opportunities to get, on linear television, on a network are obviously difficult. And you can only get those by proving you can do it. And so the way I was able to prove and work on my craft and reps and all those things is streaming. I've talked to broadcasters, much more senior than me, who just marvel at the amount of opportunities and chances you have to get on the air. It used to be such a task trying to, find a way to get on a linear broadcast, whereas now everybody's streaming their games, whether it's, Power 5 or mid-major or D2, D3. I mean, I've done some NAIA broadcasts in my time. So, and we can talk about the engagement, but from a professional development standpoint, that's one of the best things that's happened to the industry.
That's such a great story too, because you really look at it and seeing how it provided you the opportunity in your youth, if you will, and then so many doors open from there. And then I do think that it's interesting, you touched on the fact about how streaming is really kind of everywhere now at all levels. It's across the board, professional sports all the way down to the high school, junior high ranks, if you will, and everywhere in between. And it really is getting some great exposure for a lot of programs. Regardless of sport, regardless of level, you're having that ability to really kind of promote your program. So that's fantastic.
No, it's terrific. And I think the other piece too, I remember being in high school, we were doing those games those first, couple of years, and I was a junior and a senior. It almost became like appointment viewing every Friday morning, or every Monday morning, I should say. We'd go back and watch the highlights from the football game last week, and so and so would be, oh, I caught that touchdown. Oh, that's so cool. I get to watch it again or relive it, or it's a ton of fun for the students. I think, to get to revisit some really exciting things their classmates have done, whether that's football, basketball, volleyball, softball, gymnastics, swimming. I mean, whatever. It's a chance to sort of celebrate those in the community, and I know we had several examples where, we'd have guys in the cross country team couldn't go to the football game because they had to wake up early on Saturday for the race. They get to sort of relive what they missed, that next week, and vice versa, really. So I think within the students themselves, and of course the broader community of the school, parents, alumni, relatives, neighbors, they also have access to it as well.
That's fantastic.
I love that too. Put my athletic director hat on, or former, just being able to get more kids involved, right? Like, a lot of athletic directors are also activity directors, club directors, and you're just always looking for opportunities for your students and your student athletes. And one of the things that Greg and I talk about all the time is leveraging the people in the building, right? There's so much talent walking around the average high school in America. Some are great at sports, some aren't. Some love sports and are great at sports. Some love the media aspect. And I think it just helps you as an athletic director provide opportunities for your students. And I mean, that's why you're in the business, and that's why I love education-based athletics. So I love your story, man. It's amazing.
And I'll add too, I think the reason that the program was so successful in my high school was really because of the leadership of Daniel Searle, who was our faculty advisor for the program. He had been a varsity coach, a basketball. He had been in a bunch of different roles. He'd been involved in admissions and all these sorts of things. And I think the best thing he did, I mean, truly, to me, the secret behind the whole success of the program was how much he empowered students to be a part of it. If he couldn't have done all the work that it was going to take just by himself. He had to rely upon the students. And his attitude was always, if you have an idea, go do it. And it's not, not only am I giving you an opportunity to do it, but you need to take accountability for it. I can't be somebody who's constantly checking in. Did we set up this meeting? Did we save time to edit? Those types of things. So it was kind of I'm giving you the green light, but you have to be the one that's, providing the fuel and the attention to it. And I think that was one of the reasons that we got such great buy-in from our high school students. And even, honestly, as the years went by, middle school students as well. We even have, I went to a K through 12 school. There were some elementary students who would be involved, with some projects down in their school as well. But particularly at the high school level, I just think it's such a terrific opportunity to not only get them excited and try something different, but also, learn how to be accountable and how to follow through and all those things. And again, I think at any organizational level, whether it's full-time employment, the more you can empower, employees or students, the more ownership they feel. And I really think more times than not, it's going to lead to a really rewarding outcome.
This guy's a Hall of Famer, OG, because like this was early on, and thinking exactly what you said. Like, think about having the faith in your students. Like, some of this was live, right? So you're not only like turning over ownership to your students, they're live and streaming. And come on, it takes a special person. I think everybody's used to it now, but I love that because, again, he put a lot of faith in you guys to do the right thing at age 13, 14, 15, 16, which, let's be honest, doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
And I think he recognized too that, look, we all want it to look like it's, on CBS, ABC, Fox, whatever, ESPN, but it's a high school production. And considering, people watching that recognize that, I think, because they usually probably have some level, they may have a child in school, or they may have, a niece or a nephew, and, they're aware that, 15, 16-year-olds, it may not be 100%, but you know what, if you give them an opportunity, it might be better than you thought it was going to be. So I think that the whole culture of it, I think you can trust your audience and your viewership to realize that, I'm not watching the 7 o'clock news, on ABC and expecting it to be totally buttoned up. And honestly, we all know this. It's kind of fun to watch a 14-year-old. They might say, going back to the Bill Cosby, kids say the darndest things. It can be pretty entertaining as well if you have the right mindset.
It makes it special, right? Like, Greg,
Yeah.
did you ever have like school musicals and stuff? I used to fight sometimes with people because they would bring in like professional musicians for the orchestra. And I'm like, I would rather listen to the 14-year-old trumpet
Yes.
player squeak or make a mistake
Yes.
during it than having some Joe off the street who's like getting paid to be there, who's at the like New York Philharmonic. I'd rather hear it that way. So it's more genuine.
Yeah, more authentic. It gives it, to me, it gives it some soul and some character. I think that's what really, and that's what high school productions are about in my book. It's such a personal relationship. I've heard professional athletes talk about what they miss about high school and competing at that level is anybody who goes to a high school football game or high school basketball, high school, you name it, they've got a personal relationship with somebody on the field. You don't have that in the NFL. You have some of it in college or, at the professional level, but, and that's not to say that, there's a rush there. There's millions of people watching. There's a lot of positives to those aspects. But one of the coolest things about a high school event is anybody who's there really has a vested interest in somebody on the field from a human standpoint. It's not solely about wins and losses. It's much more of a relationship driven event and sort of a celebration of community.
That's fantastic to hear. And, I completely agree with Scott too, in terms of you want to see the kids doing this. That's why you go to these things. Like, you want to support them. You want to provide them that opportunity because, your story is just so incredible because at an early age, you had a path laid out for you that you were able to really leverage and be able to grow into over the years going on. And it's just a unique opportunity. And I think from the streaming perspective, not only are you broadening the campus involvement within those respective programs, if you will, but you're also providing ownership there too, and you're being able to kind of expand upon what education-based athletics can really touch on and have an impact with. And it's not now, when I was younger, it was more limited to those that were on the court, the field, et cetera. Now it's a broader brush that's being stroked, right? You're being able to have so much more impact with young people and providing them potential career paths. So it really is a very cool story to hear about the empowerment that you were given at a young age and being able to really kind of grow into the role that you're in now from a very early start. That's just so awesome to hear.
And the thing I'll add too is, I did a lot of theater, I guess practice or after school programs or whatnot when I was in elementary school and middle school. And I remember the woman who was running it would always talk about, this isn't necessarily about, all of you becoming Broadway stars. She would tell our parents that, but it'd be more about just getting in front of a crowd and being able to speak. And I think there's something to be said for that as well in broadcasting, getting in front of a camera and being able to deliver a message, being comfortable and communicating an idea. I don't care what world what professional world or industry you enter, that's going to be a valuable skill in any industry. So whether or not it's a long-term career path that is directly involved in broadcasting or media, or maybe you just become a leader at your company, or heck, if you come back and be a high school coach. I mean, the idea of sharing ideas and communicating, that's just a skill that is just critical for any organization.
I think that that communication, poise. I'll use that word sometimes. My daughter's a dancer, and like one of the things I appreciated about her dancing is just that I feel like she's got more poise than some others, just because she's always on the stage in front of people, and very transferable skills. So I think that's amazing. All right, let's dive back in a little bit. You brought up the idea of fan engagement at early on here, and so from your perspective, what sort of engagement for the fan base do you see through streaming that maybe you don't get in other places, and what's the advantage to that streaming for your fan base and engagement?
Well, I think that the thing with streaming, and again, I guess I think of streaming as something that's put on locally by the school, and I guess I'm thinking more in the college space now. But, when Georgia Tech or Auburn, those are a couple schools I work for, when they stream their games, they're not picked up by a national network, CBS, ESPN, whatever. It gives you a really unique opportunity because you kind of have, inside sources. Some stories because you're part of the organization on a day-to-day basis, 365 days out of the year, that you can really give some insight that, with all due respect to the professionals who come in, they're not going to have, because they're not there year round. They're not there in the fall or in the faculty meetings or anything else. I think high school is the same way. Where you have so much more ownership of what is, on the screen, I suppose. So not only do you have that inside information, but, one thing we had a ton of success with when I was in high school, I remember we could promote everything else going on at the school. We'd be, all right, first quarter, football obviously got a lot of viewership. So first quarter timeout, hey, by the way, we've got, Les Mis, the musical, opens up, next week. And, their showings Thursday at 7:00, Friday at 7:00, Saturday at 1. And the cool thing is, because we're all in the same community, we could have whoever was the lead in Les Mis come on at halftime and talk about how, you need to come see this and that. And, so-and-so's got a great solo and we'd love to see you. You can get your tickets here. And, so whether those things, or the other piece is, we could promote fundraising efforts. Hey, the alumni base is doing a drive, here in November, trying to boost participation. If you want to give, it kind of gives you your own channel. And I'm sure social media kind of works the same way, but it gives you a channel to where you can incorporate all sorts of different messaging and important, important ventures or efforts that somebody else in the community is making. You can then, patch it into your live streaming. And I think because everyone, I shouldn't say everyone, but there's a large audience watching the game, right? It gives you a chance to get in front of a lot of people's eyeballs. And it's the same idea with advertising at the professional level, except I think instead of it being more of a revenue driven thing, it can be more of a community building and really community engaging opportunity. If you're at a high school and say, hey, watch our stream, if it's a big rivalry game, you're going to have a lot of people tuned in. That gives you a chance to sort of share other messages that you might, want to get across to the community.
Yeah, I love that. Greg, what do you think?
I really like a couple things that you just mentioned that really kind of struck a chord with me. One, there's the autonomy within streaming. You have a little bit more flexibility. I like when earlier you were talking about the accountability. Obviously, you're going to be empowering students to be able to really broaden their skill set, if you will. But the autonomy within your broadcast to kind of promote various things. I really like the takeaway of talking about other things that are taking place on the campus, because both Scott and I, as former ADs and being on those school sites, one of the things you're always thinking about is like, how do we get exposure for everything that's going on campus? How do we get that message out? And you're provided that opportunity, like you give the example of fundraisers. Hey, Performing Arts has an event coming up this Friday. Don't forget to get your tickets, et cetera, So I really like those elements of it. I think that it's a great way for you to really kind of quote unquote advertise. And when you're talking about like the social media piece, obviously that's always going to be a big prevalent part of what every organization is doing, whether that's professional sports all the way down to youth leagues, if you will. There's going to be that social media engagement. But the one takeaway that I got from the streaming element was you have an actively engaged audience. And then you can really kind of position those other campus activities that are taking place. Those were some big takeaways for me because it's just providing further light onto what takes place on your campus to those that are already engaged and being able to really kind of build upon that campus engagement. And maybe folks that were really into the basketball game they're watching, now they're like, hey, I want to go and support this performing arts piece that's going to be going on. So some great takeaways from that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and the other thing I'd add too is we were talking about how when you're at a high school game, everyone in the stands is heavily invested in somebody on the floor. I think that extends to the audience watching the stream. I mean, look, if you're watching an NFL game, you'll go in and out. It just depends on how close you're watching it. But I think anybody who's going out of their way to pull up the stream of you're choosing that high school basketball game, they're not just doing so just to have something on in the background. They're heavily invested, and so to your point, Greg, they're a captivated audience. Probably even they're an audience that I think the NFL. I keep going to the NFL, the Major League, NBA, whatever. They wish their audience was as engaged and captivated as yours is. Now, granted, yours is of course smaller, but I think the attention and again how captivated they are is much higher than you would get on a larger scale broadcast.
Absolutely. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit, like we talked about this a little bit in terms of like how most people's minds go directly towards the professional or collegiate realm when it comes to streaming. But in your experience, you've seen all levels. How does that streaming impact play in the high school world? Like how much of an impact does being able to provide streaming to a high school fan base? What does that do for that fan base? Give us your thoughts on that.
Well, I think it just makes it more accessible. I think, we talk about even at this is obviously a long time ago, but, when every game has started to be on television, we're going decades back now for whether it's professional or college, all of a sudden it just became so much easier to follow a team on a game by game basis or an event by event basis. And I think, I remember going in middle school, we'd hear about, the eighth grade, soccer team won their game 6-1. It was just something. It was an announcement we would get over the loudspeaker. Which I guess sounded good, but I think with anything, if you can see it and you can really watch it, just as a human being, you're going to be a little more invested in it. So I think what it does more than anything, it keeps your fan base, your audience connected. And it feels like they're more of a part of it. They're not just reading, what was the box score in the student paper. It was, I saw that goal that so-and-so scored. You're not just hearing about, oh, you should have seen that bicycle kick they had. It's like, no, I saw it on the stream. That was wild. And now all of a sudden you've got a highlight you can be playing in a school assembly, or you've got something, that they can throw on TikTok or social media, and boom, it's, everybody's talking about it. So I think it's just such a easier way to connect with the accomplishment of a classmate or a peer by seeing it, by really seeing it, as opposed to just hearing it word of mouth, which is obviously how things have, always gone, it seems, as far as the history of humanity. All of a sudden we have this ability to televise things. And it's again, being able to do it at the high school level, to me, is just so impactful. I mean, we're used to watching pro sports, seeing those highlights. The next thing you know, you can have a highlight from the, junior varsity lacrosse game that all of a sudden is accessible. And I think that just gets everybody's buy-in and attention a lot better than just hearing it over the loudspeaker during announcements, Monday morning.
And I really like that loudspeaker analogy, right? Because I remember, Scott, you and I remember years and years ago when we were young kids and we're sitting in school and you hear the announcement of, the baseball team won 3-4 or whatever. It didn't really resonate, it like, hey, cool, you guys won. Whereas I think when you have that streaming component, you're enabling them to tell their story in real time. Like you can see that team story evolve and develop in front of you as the action's taking place. And going back to your point of just like the engagement element, when you're seeing the results and seeing how things are playing out, it paints a better picture, a much better story. And I would definitely venture to say it's going to get far more engagement when you have that ability and you start getting a larger following because of it. What are your thoughts, Scott?
Well, first of all, most of my friends, if they heard their name on the announcements, it wasn't for a positive thing. Let's be honest. So let's go there first. Two, hey man, like I would kill to have some like better film of me as an athlete. At least, I mean, I know my stories have gotten much better over the years, but it'd be nice to show my kids like without trying to get that VHS machine out. And find some like really chopped up video playing. So like this is like there in perpetuity if you think about it. Yes, the ability to grab clips and things like that. Sometimes the film doesn't lie isn't always the best part of everything, but when there's great things happen, I use the word celebrate, right? Like this just helps you celebrate community a lot of times, and then obviously like the idea of somebody like I'm in the New York City like metro area here, and I mean I never understood how so many parents got to 4 o'clock games, to be honest with you, especially pre-COVID when everybody was in the office. But I mean, we could probably create a marketing campaign, Greg, for productivity. Like there,
Yeah.
people had to leave work to get to games early. Like you could literally sit at work, watch your kid's game, and then get back to work if you needed to. So, grandma in another state, like outside the zip code, right, kind of stuff, where it's just it opens up such a world of accessibility. Somebody used that term. So, having it at the high school level, it just seems, I guess, as old as I am, it just seems like something that was so far away such a short time ago, and yet it's been ingrained already in everything that we're doing for a while now. So it's amazing.
And this story is a little heavy, but I think it really can be impactful as far as the value of streaming these games. I remember we were doing a playoff run in football. We were going to the quarterfinals or something. Our team pulled off a big wins. We were all excited. We were packing up the equipment. We got on our little broadcast streaming bus. We weren't riding with the team, obviously. But I remember before we left, the head football coach got onto our bus, stood up, and said, "I can't thank you all enough. My father has been extremely sick, and pretty much on his deathbed. And he said the reason he stayed alive as long as he did was because he knew the game was coming up on Friday night, and we were in the quarterfinals." And I'm still very close to our head coach to this day, and he just insists that was one of the reasons his father lasted as long as he did, was so he could watch the game on Friday. And again, that's obviously an extreme example, but I think it also it paints a picture, and it's not all that uncommon. It means so much
It's
to
real, man.
relatives. Yeah, so
Yeah.
real.
It's real. Like I'll piggyback another heavy one. I had a dad with advanced ALS who was stuck in a bed with triplets on our football team, who, like, early on we could get him to the game and handicap spots, and but there was a point where unfortunately he couldn't get there, and he got to watch his kids play for a long time, and it just would not have been possible without it.
Yeah.
So those stories are everywhere, unfortunately, but fortunately at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
I said the last thing I was going to add too is, on a lighter note, I'm now 10 years out of high school, and not every time, but half the time I get together with my buddies, we're talking about something that happened in high school in a football game. We can go back and watch it. Like, we can go pull it up. How cool is that? I mean, I know they were. I've talked to many people older than me, and they still talk about, oh, so and so caught this dramatic pass in the quarterfinal, and they're describing it with tremendous detail. But at the end of the day, it's still just word of mouth. When you get to see it, and again, having those moments for posterity, you want to talk about keeping that community together, I don't know, getting alumni excited about, maybe giving back to the school 10, 15 years from now, when you can sit there and say, remember that time, we beat South on the dramatic last second play and we stormed the field. How does that not get your school spirit and pride and go and say, you know what? Yeah. Again, this is maybe a little too transactional, but no, I think it helps in fundraising, quite honestly, and in keeping alumni involved, because those memories all of a sudden are so much more accessible than just sort of distantly in your mind.
The Kenny Chesney song, like Boys of Fall, they talk about like the newspaper clippings in the coffee shop.
Yes.
I have actually seen people with TV, like businesses with TV monitors up, that actually replay high school streamed games for like that hometown feel,
Yes.
literally in that
Yes.
coffee shop. So no more newspaper clipping per se. Um, but how about that streaming video on the screen? How cool would that be?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So, I mean, you're lucky enough to be involved. You've been involved at the high school, collegiate, and professional level at this point. Anything that stands out to you between, like, you kind of touched on it a little bit, difference between the high school streaming up all the way to like Major League Baseball streaming? What do you see the major difference as?
I think what jumped out to me is there weren't that many differences, honestly. I mean, the equipment's nicer. You've probably got people operating the equipment who are a little more experienced, but the process, the quote unquote farm to table, from the nuts and bolts to the screen it's pretty similar. And I think that goes back to just how valuable the experiences can be as a student if you do end up somewhere in this field. Again, the the terminology might be different, so on and so forth, or might be some mild differences there, but the similarity of it, quite honestly, was probably what was most surprising to me as I continue to move up the ladder. Now, obviously, the more cameras you're adding, the more replay machine. All of a sudden, you got replay, which is very uncommon, obviously, at the streaming level at high school. But as far as covering the game and setting up the audio and working on transmission and all these other details, the process is very similar. And I think um, that's one of the things. I mean, I remember going to high school. I grew up in Atlanta, so occasionally we'd go down to a Georgia Tech basketball game and go look inside the production truck, and they'd show us a station and be like, "Oh, we call that something different, but we know exactly what this role does," or "Oh yeah, that's how we do it too." So I think, again, aside from just the resources and the manpower, and obviously you've got full adults doing the work as opposed to maybe a sophomore in high school. There are differences there, but as far as the process and kind of, again, how you kind of go from here's the game happening onto the field to getting it on the screen somewhere is actually really similar.
Very cool. Yeah, and I mean, listen, we're advancing pretty quickly too. I think replay and things like that between the major companies that are out there right now,
Hmm.
streaming, I think that's coming if it's not there already, right? Like we're obviously a little behind, but it's coming, and I think it's pretty amazing to think about. Greg, thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that as you're talking about like the similarities between the two, and then Scott, to your point of like things that are forthcoming, and it really tries to mirror, it seems like, what's going on in the professional realm, right? And I think Wiley, you had mentioned earlier where a lot of times people are tuning in and they're being understanding of the skill level of those that are broadcasting, right? They're not going to be anticipating, a seasoned professional. They're anticipating someone that's up and coming and learning these skill sets. And I think that that's a great part of it. But Scott, to your point, I mean, like with it wanting to mirror what's taking place at the higher levels, I think that it's driving the demand within those major companies to make the advancements to try and make it as similar as possible and as what's taking place at the professional and collegiate ranks. And I mean, in this day and age too, I'm never ceased to be amazed by how much young people know about technology and how they can leverage it. And there's certain times where like I've tuned into a stream and I'm watching something like, how did they do that? And it's really innovative to see how they're engaging with the platform. So certainly pretty cool to see what's coming down the pipe. And I would imagine it's just going to continue to grow and expand in terms of what schools are going to be able to do. Obviously it's never going to be the same as at the level that you're at, where you're having like multicams at every single event and all the bells and whistles, if you will. But I feel like there's going to be more and more of those elements to strive to make it as professional as possible.
Like harnessing and leveraging that skill for good as opposed to bad. I mean, it's the truth though, right? Like, come on, providing a tool and a forum for people to do it use their skills for the right reasons. Pretty amazing. It's up to the
Yeah.
adults to make sure they leverage that.
Yeah, no, and again, I thought one of the more powerful motivators was when you would hear from maybe it's a classmate of yours. Hey, my mom has been out of town the last couple of weeks. She got to watch, dude. I just can't tell you how much I appreciate doing that. Or maybe you hear from the parent directly. And one of the favorite comments I would always get when I was in high school and even early on in college is I would hear from the parent of an athlete, and they'd say, "Man, you're better than the guys they have on NFL on Fox, or you're better than the guys they have doing the Mets game." And I would always say, "Oh, that's very kind. I appreciate it." And then I'd kind of tell that story to my parents, but yeah, I think the biggest difference between me and the guy doing the Mets game is I'm saying their kid's name a lot, and I think they think that's really cool. So I
I
got a
would
big
like to
kick out
point
of that.
out, hold on, Wiley. I would like to point out that you could have used the Braves there, but you just used the Mets. Let's be straight up. I
Hey,
got you.
Gary, Keith, and Ron are the gold standard in my book, man. Those
There you
guys are
go.
terrific. So again, real recognize real, I guess is how they would say it.
There you go.
Oh, that's fantastic. So one thing I want to kind of pick your brain on a little bit. I mean, you've seen it at all levels. You've seen it at the professional. You've seen it at the collegiate ranks. Kind of talking from the high school and even the collegiate a little bit. How do you see how streaming really kind of builds that campus community spirit? Like of being able to have that sense of pride around the organization. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's other than what we've talked about, where you can go back and revisit moments and retell those stories. I think there's also, at least I found when I was in high school, and granted this is a long time ago, but there was kind of this ownership of like, oh yeah, like our school, yeah, we cover every game, like we're gonna be there. There's kind of like almost like a pride factor with like, yeah, like at my school we cover it really well. We're gonna be there. We're gonna have our 4 cameras. We're going to have our replay if that's an option. We're going to have our pregame show going on. And I actually remember, and again, this isn't necessarily live streaming, but we started a sort of a weekly news show when I was in school, and I'm sure everybody's doing that. But for whatever reason, my class, all of a sudden, one of the most anticipated parts of the whole report was the weather report. And it wasn't because people were curious about the weather, but it was like, who's going to be the weather person this week? Like, it'd be kind of like a surprise, like, ooh, who got to do it this week? It almost became like this big reveal. And, one week we'd have, somebody who's, maybe a soloist, in the choir, would do it and they would sing it or something, something like that. So it almost became like this, like, thing people would talk about as like, oh man, I hope I get to do the weather or something. Like, again, it's something so innocuous and use. I mean, we do a weekly weather report. By the time you get to the third day, you have no idea if it's going to be accurate or not. But it really just became kind of and it also, quite honestly, became an opportunity to be kind of creative too. Like we had one guy come in who just wore a sweater vest. Like that was kind of. That started a whole chain of like, what are you going to wear? Doing, somebody wear like a robe or something. Like it became this like total little shtick, almost like we were doing a comedy show almost. But again, I think that just creates the connectivity across the whole class. It was something we could all kind of look forward to and laugh about. And again, I to the teachers' credit, I thought they did a good job of making sure it wasn't just one basketball player passing it off to the next basketball player. I mean, it's an opportunity to kind of have all different groups and clubs and teams represented, and I think again, it kind of gives you a chance to show some personality too. That coming from that pocket of the community.
Those shows are amazing. Like those Friday, Monday shows. I mean, I've been a part of those and not doing them, but watching them and looking forward to it. Again, I hear you, man. Building that community is amazing. So talk to me a little bit about if there was a school, an athletic director, an advisor out there right now who's kind of like teetering between, do we go in this direction? Not even necessarily a streaming direction, but maybe more of like a self-production kind of direction. What would you say to them to convince them one way or the other? You kind of said a lot of it, but and what advice might you give them as they're maybe starting out?
I think the first thing I would say is, if you're watching a school that maybe has been doing it for 10 years and you see 5 cameras and replays and score box on the ground, don't feel like you either have to do it that way or you can't do it at all. I think it is so important just to not feel like there's, you either got to do it at level 10 or not at all. I think everybody who's done this has started at about level 1 or 2. And I think the most important thing in my mind is just getting it started. I mean, I'll be honest, once the baseball season's over, I'll do kind of a web stream game in football for our local public broadcasting station. They have their main show, which is more like a real telecast. And then they have this secondary web game they offer. We do one camera. It's one camera, one announcer. There's no first down markers. But again, when the alternative is the game is not on at all, people are thrilled to have the one camera show. And it doesn't require an army of 15 students, or 20 students showing up. You can do it, with just a couple of really invested and committed students. And I think, again, going back to my faculty advisor in high school, that was one of the best things he did. Was there wasn't a roster of positions to where we have to have somebody working camera 1, 2, 3, a board operator, a director, a producer. And if we didn't have a name besides each of those roles, we couldn't do the game. I think you've got to be willing to be flexible, variable. Okay, hey, this is a road game that's 2 hours away. You're not going to have your whole roster potentially. And that was the other thing I thought that was really effective as well, is that our advisor did not run it like it was a varsity sport, to where it was, you can't miss a practice, you can't miss a game, you've got to be there. It was very much a come and go as you please, which, again, I'm not saying there's not value in having that commitment and discipline and all those types of things, but it was kind of an alternative to where whenever somebody was there, it was they really wanted to be. And it felt more, quote unquote, fun, sort of a fun activity as opposed to accountability. And, I think, what you look for, and I think what worked out really well, it actually wasn't so much in my class, but just talking to him over the years, he would try and identify, okay, there's this group of 4 in the class of 2027 that seems really bought into this. Leverage that group. Once you can get a few people committed, take advantage of, hey, these guys are all, or these girls or guys are all friends. They enjoy doing this. This is kind of a good nucleus to kind of build around. In the same way that you might, try and develop a basketball, football, softball, baseball team. Is, hey, this group of freshmen, man, they've got some really good talent. This could be a group that really grows as they move up through high school. And I think you can kind of identify similar things from a media standpoint, as much as or broadcasting standpoint, and that can be as much technical know-how or skill as much as it's just commitment. They find it interesting, capitalize on that, and empower that group. And I think, like anything, if you see a group of people having a lot of fun, it draws you. Maybe I want to do that. And I think it almost became a word of mouth sort of recruiting tool when you could sit there and say, like, hey, is doing the broadcast this week, like, is that, like, can I do that? And you say, yeah, sure, come along. And people would ask, like, well, I got to be there for every game. It's like, no, just, whatever you want to do it. I think it's just, to me, I think it made it a very accessible and attractive extracurricular activity for maybe somebody who wasn't playing a sport that season, or maybe, the performing arts, it was over for the semester or whatnot. And again, I think more times than not, we found people who got introduced to it. All of a sudden, they'd say, you know what, I want to make this a priority. Like, I want this to kind of be something I'm a big part of, and have an opportunity to grow here and be in a leadership position, all those sorts of things. So I thought that was the two things were he did not make it mandatory. He did not want to compare it to a varsity sport. And two, he was willing to broadcast based on the person. You hear all the time about every game is different when you're game planning. You got to game plan your personnel, what's available to you that week. And I think he took a similar playbook to, all right, who we got this week, and kind of cater it to that. It doesn't need, we had 4 cameras last week. Maybe we're going to have 6 this week, or only 2. I think having the end goal just be get something on the air. And I do think, having said that, consistency is really important. I think in any media form, like, if you're going to broadcast the football game, you want to try and do as many as you can, because what you want to do is build that relationship with your audience, that when it gets to be Friday night at 7:00, they know the game's going to be on. If you're able to provide that consistently to where they can rely upon it, it can start to become more of a routine, and you can build a better commitment. So I do think, again, it doesn't have to be the same caliber of product every time out, but I think it is critical to try and at least provide something at a consistent time frame, or whenever the team is playing, just know, hey, something's going to be there. I think there's a lot of value in that.
So many good call outs there. roster management, right? We
Yeah,
could use that term, and it comes
yeah,
back to athletics. But hey, like
absolutely,
honestly, you don't want to have all seniors on the roster because you're in trouble
100%.
next year,
Yes,
right? You got to empower
yes,
those younger kids, give them some responsibility, give them some playing time, so
yep.
that like
Oh
it's
yeah,
not like just a complete rebuild the next year.
100%.
Having them, like you said, more engaged because they're choosing to be there. I mean, I was a history teacher. I had a lot more kids enthusiastic about sports and American culture than world history, where they had to
Yes.
be in that class.
Uh-huh.
Um, and then the technology, right? Like your thought of, hey, it doesn't have to be a huge production every time. And listen, let's be clear, with the technology and these AI cameras, no matter which company you're working with, like you don't necessarily need a full production, but as long as that consistency is there, and like, hey, these 2 weeks it's just a stream of the game, you're not going to really hear much at all. But now we got some special games where we're going to be able to have a full crew doing it. Like all those things resonate a ton with me, Greg.
Exactly. The consistency piece that really hits home. Because yes, is it always going to be the exact same level of production? No. There's always going to be that fluid element when you're involved in the high school space, and I think that ads need to remember that. It's not always going to be a cookie cutter production that you have your full lineup, because things take place. You're dealing with technology. Maybe you're on the road and you don't have the hookups that you thought or were told you're going to have, and being able to have that flexibility within it. I think that's a key takeaway for ads is, hey, be consistent with it, support it, allow some fluidity to it. Don't make it as regimented as you would like it's not fall camp for football, right? Like, you want to make
Mhm.
sure they're going to get out of it what they put into it. And if they were truly wanting to go down a career path similar to yourself, obviously they're going to be more engaged into it because they see the value of it. But I really like that consistency piece, because then obviously for your fan base, they know, hey, to your point, every Thursday girls basketball game, we know it's going to be broadcast. Let's make sure that we're getting involved. Hey, who's calling the game tonight? Not sure, but we know that we're going to be able to actually watch it. And I think that that's a key takeaway. And one final question for me that I kind of want to just pick your brain about. I know we've been kind of gearing this towards, how schools can engage with this, and, the campus involvement. If there were a couple pieces of advice you would give to a young person that is potentially wanting to go down a similar career path as you, and they want to get their start utilizing streaming at the high school level, what were some of the skills that you learned early on that benefited you throughout your career, if you'd be willing to share those with maybe some of our younger folks that might be tuning in?
Yeah, I think the thing that I always think about, we called our stream WCAT. We're the Wildcats, so we kind of made a little four-letter call sign for it. WCAT is what we called it. I remember, obviously, I think a lot of people have interest in being on the air. I think that's obviously an attractive position, just because you get to hear your voice and vanity and everything else. But I thought one thing that really made our group really good was everybody, no matter what your role was that day, you were helping set up. You'd run the cable down to the sideline for the sideline camera, or you would set up the cameras on top of the press box. Everybody needed to know how to do almost everything. I'm not saying you want to keep consistency in roles, just from a standpoint of the more you do something, the better you're going to be. But I think that was a really important part of our culture. Is some people, when the game's over, especially for us in football, the game would end, and all of a sudden all the players and then the other students are mobbing down on the field. And I think for us, it's like, well, we can't do that yet. We got to clean up our stuff. And I think that really kind of gives you a good team culture for me. So I think that was the first thing, is wanting to learn how to do all sorts of different things and being committed. I think it just kind of helped our culture. So that was one thing, is make sure that you're not just there just to roll in there and I'm the announcer, and then as soon as the game's over, like, all right, peace, see you guys on Monday. I think that's important. And then I think too, I think I'm a really good example of this. When I was in high school, obviously I did a lot of the announcing. And then when I went to college, the first thing I was doing a lot of the technical stuff behind the scenes. And then eventually got to do some more announcing stuff. And I think my work with the Braves is a great example. I've been doing their sideline reporting at times this year. But when I'm not doing that, I've been running the score bug. I'm the one who does the balls and the strikes on the little bug so you can tell what the score is and the count. Or I'm the one who's doing the graphics, sponsored by, Sabaro or whoever the sponsor. I'm the one who comes up with that content and builds that for the show. I've done a little looking into replay and how that works. And I think not only and I told people this all the time, but this might actually be I'm 30 years old. This might be the first year where I actually make more money doing stuff on air than behind the scenes. The on air stuff to me that was kind of the long-term goal. It was, where my passion was, but I'm interested in having an apartment that has running water and lights, right? I mean, that's also something I'm interested in, putting food on the table. And I made a lot more consistent money doing a lot of these behind the scenes roles. And so not only was that a way for me to sustain my pursuit of this, because if you end up in a spot where you say, okay, I'm going to do the games, but if I have to do this more than 2 years, just the money's not going to work out, all of a sudden it feels like you're kind of cutting yourself short. Because it does take, at least not for everybody, but in my experience, it takes a long time to sort of, create these opportunities. So the more runway you can give yourself by having other skills, ways to contribute beyond just, being in front of the camera, I think can give you a chance to outlast a lot of other people who are pursuing similar, career goals. And then two, when you get to wherever you want to be, I've heard story. Brian Anderson's a great example. Brian does Major League Baseball postseason on TBS. He's the voice of the Milwaukee Brewers. Does a ton of NBA on TNT and all these sorts of things. His first role in television, he was a grip running cable, behind the camera. And then he went into audio. And now, again, he's still calling games while he's doing all of this. But, that was kind of the playbook I tried to go after was let me call games. And then when I need to make money, instead of just being a waiter or something that's not really adjacent to the industry, maybe I can get in and contribute in other ways. And one of the things, Brian's got a terrific reputation. One of the things that sticks out to anybody who works with them, no matter what role you're in, it feels like he knows what your challenges are. As a replay op, what are your challenges? Or as an audio tech, what makes things difficult for you? And he knows that because he's pretty much done all those jobs. And I think there's just so much value in that. It gives you so much credibility with your crew, your coworkers, and it gives you just kind of that second nature insight into what it takes to pull this thing off. And again, I think that plays not only at the highest levels, Major League Baseball or NBA or whatever, but also in high school. Again, I think if you know how the graphics machine works, you know what your buddy's dealing with over there, you can appreciate, what his challenges are. Better yet, if you've got something you want him to build, you can kind of really tailor it to, hey, I know this is probably the best way this machine works, or these are the limitations. So like, can we do something like this? And I think not only does it help your product be better, but B, and almost more importantly, I think it just builds a really good culture. So those would be the two things. And again, I think that more than anything is one of the reasons I've been able to keep doing this for so long, is because I have been available to fill a lot of different roles, and therefore I could get a lot of different paychecks and keep my lights on and keep eating and all of those great things that are so critical to sustaining life.
No, I think that's great advice for young people. I mean, like, don't just have a singular focus. Really fill the toolbox. Be multifaceted in your approach and being able to be useful to the team that you're working with. It's not only going to be great skills for them to develop into the roles that they want to, it's going to help them eventually evolve into great leaders too, because they can really relate to people that are performing tasks that they may have done before. And that's even great advice for athletic directors too, is just remember, the things that you've done throughout the years, you've experienced similar situations and you can help people along the way. So I think that's awesome advice for any level of life, in all honesty. So Scott, your thoughts?
I mean, I would add, like, take pride in every one of those jobs that you do.
Yes.
Right? Like, no matter what it is, take pride. I was just reading this morning about Nike, and I think they have a new CEO, Elliot Hill. I saw, I don't know if it was on X or something, but like, check out the dude's resume. He started out as an intern at Nike. He is now just came out of retirement. He's the new CEO of Nike. And if you look at this guy's resume, literally had just about every job on the way up. And listen, not everybody's going to get there, but I mean, you talk about credibility. and speaking to everybody in that organization at this point. So put food on the table, have running water, and take pride and aspire to get to CEO of Nike. Why the heck not?
Yeah. And on that topic of taking pride in it too, Scott, I would add that, I worked for 3 years when I was in college in the Braves press box, and I was essentially the press box cashier for 3 years. And the way I would describe it was, let's say Gary, Keith, and Ron with the Mets were in town and they wanted to get a hot dog. I was the guy they'd pay $5 to, and I'd say, I'll go get a hot dog. And so I took it as, seriously. I want to make sure I was always present, attentive, all those things. And I felt like, when my name came up to maybe take on a different role, like doing the stats for MLB.com, I did that for a couple of years afterwards. The discussion was, well, I don't know if Wiley's ever done something like this, but I'll tell you one thing, he's a dang good cashier. So, he'd probably be good at this. We know he's going to give it his full attention. Again, did taking a 5 or taking a 20 and giving back 3 5s have much to do with scoring a baseball game on a computer? No, but I showed up on time. I made sure I, took care of the cash box. Again, very, very such small, really, on paper, inconsequential tasks, but it's an opportunity for you to show someone who might be in a position to hire you for another position later on that, hey, you take it very seriously, you're reliable. And I have found the longer I've gone in my career, and I'm sure you guys found something similar, that when you're trying to hire a position, if you feel like that person is just reliable, consistent, and can do the job, that's almost more important than really having the necessary skill sets. My first job out of college was working in creative video at Georgia Tech. I hadn't done squat with creative video, but I'd been working in the athletic department for 5 years. I knew all the coaches. I had relationships inside the building. So any type of onboarding process was going to be essentially just super quick. And they felt like, well, he's learned how to do this. He's learned how to do that. He's done writing. He's done statistics. Who's to say he couldn't learn how to do some creative video? And then I do think the one other big factor was I was extraordinarily cheap at that point. So that was probably an easy sell as well.
We'll have to ask you offline who the best tipper was.
Yeah,
we'll take that offline.
Yes, exactly. But again, that just goes back to just any chance you can get to get your foot in the door and demonstrate that you are a competent, attentive employee, human being, no matter what the task is almost, I don't want to say irrelevant, but it's not nearly as important as just showcasing your ability to do a job, do it consistently, be a positive contributor to the work environment.
It's like the old coaching cliche: 2 things you can control, your attitude and your effort.
Yep, 100%.
Well, folks, I think that this has been a great conversation. I think that's probably going to put a wrap on this episode, and that we really, really enjoyed having you on today. We can't thank you enough, Wiley. Appreciate you joining us and, helping everyone see the different levels and layers that are really involved in streaming. So cannot thank you enough for joining us today. Scott, as always, really appreciate you joining in. It's always fun having our collective banter going back and forth, but just a fantastic episode today, gentlemen. I really appreciate you joining.
Thanks, guys. Wiley, great to meet you. Thank you.
No, it was a pleasure. And the last thing I'll say is I feel so indebted to a lot of the coaches and ADs and faculty advisors I had in high school. I think they really gave me a chance to not only pursue this, but sort of believe it was possible. So I can't tell you, whether it's Dan Searle or Jerry Romberg, Eddie Dupriest, all these people who played such consequential roles in high school for me. I'm still in touch with all 3 of those guys. And it just means so much. So I just, don't forget that. I'm sure, you work in education, I'm sure you know that, but I can't tell you how important those people were in giving me the opportunity and the confidence to pursue what I have the last 10 years.
Well, we thank you for allowing us a little bit of a sneak peek into that knowledge base that you've gained throughout the years. I'm sure many ADs that were tuning into this episode have gained a wealth of knowledge as it relates to fan engagement and how they can really leverage streaming. And with that said, if you liked what you heard today on our broadcast, please stay tuned for future episodes. Make sure you follow us wherever you get your podcast from, whether that be Spotify or Apple Podcasts, so you don't miss any new content that's coming out. From AD 360, I'm Greg Vandermade.
Scott Rosenberg.
Until next time, folks.